The morning sun was barely peeking over the horizon when Jake Matthews heard the first scream rip through the quiet streets of Millfield, Ohio. He'd been grabbing his morning coffee from the kitchen counter, same routine he'd followed for the past 5 years since moving to this sleepy little town. But today was gonna be different, real different. The scream came again, this time closer, and it sent chills racing down his spine like ice water. Jake wasn't the type to spook easily. He'd done 2 tours in Afghanistan and seen his fair share of chaos, but something about that sound made his gut twist in ways he hadn't felt since the war. He set his mug down and moved toward the front window, pulling back the faded blue curtains his ex-wife had picked out years ago. What he saw outside made his blood run cold and his military training kick in faster than a lightning strike. Mrs. Henderson from across the street was stumbling around her front yard in her pink bathrobe, but she wasn't just stumbling, she was lurching, moving like her joints had rusted overnight. Her gray hair was matted with something dark, and when she turned toward his house, Jake saw her face and nearly dropped to his knees. Half of it was gone, just gone, like something had taken a massive bite out of her cheek. But the worst part wasn't the missing flesh, it was her eyes. They were milky white, completely vacant, like looking into the windows of an abandoned house. And she was making this low, guttural moaning sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest, something that definitely wasn't human anymore. Jake rubbed his eyes hard, thinking maybe he was still dreaming, but when he looked again, Mrs. Henderson was still there, and now she had company. Old Pete from down the block was shambling up the sidewalk, his mechanic's coveralls torn and stained with what looked like motor oil, except motor oil didn't smell like copper pennies and death. Pete's left arm was hanging at a weird angle, clearly broken, but he didn't seem to notice or care. Behind him came more neighbors, people Jake had waved to for years, shared small talk about the weather and complained about property taxes with. Now they looked like extras from some B-grade horror flick, except this wasn't Hollywood magic, this was his front yard, his street, his life turning into a nightmare. The sound of squealing tires made Jake spin around toward the main road that ran past their neighborhood. A bright red pickup truck came flying around the corner, way too fast for the residential speed limit, with someone hanging out the passenger window screaming at the top of their lungs. The truck swerved hard to avoid a group of those things, because that's what they were now, things, not people, and slammed straight into the Johnsons' mailbox, sending it flying like a rocket. The driver gunned it again, tires smoking against the asphalt, desperate to get the hell out of Dodge. But as the truck disappeared around the next bend, Jake could see more of those creatures pouring out from between houses, from backyards, from God knows where, like ants spilling out of a kicked anthill. His phone started buzzing like crazy on the kitchen table, and Jake stumbled backward to grab it, never taking his eyes off the window. The screen was lighting up with emergency alerts, text messages, missed calls from his buddy Marcus who worked dispatch at the sheriff's department. The latest text made his stomach drop straight through the floor. Jake, get out now. Whatever you do, don't let them bite you. Heading to the high school. Military is setting up safe zone. Move your ass, bro. The timestamp showed Marcus had sent that message 20 minutes ago, which meant this thing, whatever the hell it was, had been spreading fast while Jake was sleeping off last night's beer and ESPN marathon. Outside, Mrs. Henderson had reached his front fence and was pressing against it, her dead eyes somehow finding him through the window. The wooden slats started creaking under her weight, and Jake realized with crystal clarity that his quiet morning coffee routine had just become a fight for survival. He'd trained for combat, survived roadside bombs and firefights in the desert, but nothing had prepared him for watching his neighbors turn into flesh-hungry monsters. The familiar world he'd known for 5 years was crumbling faster than a house of cards in a hurricane, and Jake Matthews was about to find out just how strong humanity could be when hell itself came knocking. Jake didn't waste another second staring at what used to be Mrs. Henderson. His military instincts kicked in like a well-oiled machine, and he was already moving toward his bedroom closet where he kept his old service rifle locked up tight. The wooden fence outside was starting to bow under the pressure of more bodies pressing against it, and that creaking sound was getting louder by the minute. He grabbed his tactical vest from the back of the closet, the one he'd sworn he'd never need again after leaving the service, and started loading it with everything he could think of: extra magazines, his hunting knife, energy bars, water bottles, first aid kit. His hands were steady, muscle memory taking over, but his mind was racing like a Formula One car on the final lap. The sound of splintering would made him curse under his breath. That fence wasn't gonna hold much longer, and he needed to get moving before his house turned into ground zero for a zombie buffet. Jake slung the rifle over his shoulder and grabbed his truck keys from the dresser, already planning his route to the high school. Main Street was probably crawling with those things by now, so he'd have to take the back roads through the industrial district, maybe cut through the old Miller farm if he had to. As he headed for the garage, his phone rang again. This time it was a number he didn't recognize. "Yeah," he answered, keeping his voice low while he checked the garage door opener. "This Jake Matthews on Elm Street?" The voice was female, young, scared out of her mind but trying to keep it together. "Who's asking?" "My name's Riley Parker. I'm trapped in the Quickie Mart on 5th Street with my little brother Tommy. Marcus Rodriguez from the sheriff's department gave me your number, said you were military and might know what the hell is going on." Jake felt his jaw tighten. The Quickie Mart was only about 6 blocks from his house, right on his planned route to the high school. "How many of those things are outside your location?" "I count maybe 15, 20. They showed up about an hour ago when this whole nightmare started. My manager tried to run outside to help some lady who was screaming, and they just swarmed him like he was made of candy." Riley's voice cracked a little, but she pulled it back together fast. "Tommy's only 8 years old, man. I can't let anything happen to him." Jake hit the garage door button and watched it slowly roll up, revealing his black Chevy Silverado sitting there like a knight in shining armor. Outside, he could hear more moaning, more shuffling feet, more of whatever disease or virus had turned his neighbors into walking nightmares. "Riley, listen to me carefully. I'm gonna swing by and get you and Tommy, but you need to be ready to move fast. When I pull up, you run straight for my truck, no looking back, no hesitation. You got anything to defend yourselves with?" "Baseball bat and a tire iron. Tommy's got his pocket knife, but it's barely bigger than a toothpick. Better than nothing. Stay away from the windows and keep quiet until you see my truck." Jake fired up the Silverado, and the engine roared to life like an angry beast. "What's your timeline looking like? How long can you hold out?" The front door's barricaded with shopping carts and soda cases, but one of those things almost broke through the back window 10 minutes ago. "If more show up." She didn't need to finish that sentence. Jake threw the truck in reverse and backed out of his garage, immediately spotting at least a dozen zombies scattered across his front yard like some twisted Halloween decoration display. Mrs. Henderson was still at the fence, but now she had friends, the mailman, a couple of kids who couldn't be older than 16, and what looked like half the morning joggers from the neighborhood. They all turned toward the sound of his engine like moths to a flame, their dead eyes locking onto his truck with single-minded hunger that made his skin crawl. "All right, Riley, I'm rolling out now. Stay sharp and stay alive, cavalry's coming." He ended the call and floored the gas pedal, sending gravel flying as he tore out of his driveway. The zombie parade in his yard started stumbling toward him, but they moved like they were walking through molasses. Jake had speed on his side, but in a town full of walking dead, speed might not be enough to keep them breathing. Jake's truck roared down Maple Avenue like a bat out of hell, dodging abandoned cars and scattered debris that looked like the aftermath of a tornado. The radio was nothing but static and emergency broadcasts on repeat, telling people to stay indoors and wait for help that probably wasn't coming anytime soon. Through his windshield, he could see smoke rising from at least 3 different locations across town, and the distant sound of sirens was getting fainter by the minute. Whatever had hit Millfield wasn't just some isolated incident, this was full-scale chaos, and the authorities were getting overwhelmed faster than a dam breaking in a flood. As he turned onto 5th Street, Jake's heart nearly stopped beating. The Quickie Mart was surrounded by a crowd of zombies that looked like a twisted block party from hell. They were pressed up against the windows, clawing at the glass with their fingernails worn down to bloody stubs, leaving streaks of gore that made Jake's stomach turn. Some were still wearing their pajamas, others looked like they'd been caught in the middle of their morning routines. One lady still had curlers in her hair, except half her scalp was missing. But the worst part was how many there were. Riley had said 15 or 20, but Jake was counting at least 40, maybe 50 of those things shambling around the parking lot like they were waiting for a concert to start. He pulled out his phone and speed-dialed Riley's number, keeping his eyes on the nightmare scene in front of him. "Riley, it's Jake. I'm here, but we got a serious problem. There's way more of them than you thought." I know. They just keep showing up, like they can smell us or something. Tommy's scared out of his mind, and I'm running out of ways to keep him calm." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but Jake could hear the panic creeping in around the edges. "The back window finally gave out about 5 minutes ago. I got it blocked with a vending machine, but it won't hold forever." Jake studied the scene, his tactical mind working overtime to find a solution that didn't end with all 3 of them becoming zombie chow. The front entrance was completely blocked by the undead crowd, and trying to ram through would probably just get his truck stuck in the middle of a feeding frenzy. But he noticed something: most of the zombies were focused on the front of the store, drawn by the sounds Riley and Tommy were making inside. The side alley was relatively clear, maybe only 3 or 4 of those things wandering around aimlessly. "Listen carefully," Jake said, revving his engine to get the attention of nearby zombies. "I'm gonna create a distraction, draw as many of them away from the store as possible. When you hear me honking my horn 3 times, that's your signal to move. Get Tommy and run for the side exit, the one that leads to the alley. I'll be waiting there with the engine running. What if it doesn't work? What if they don't follow you? Then we improvise, adapt, and overcome. That's what we do." Jake could hear the uncertainty in her voice, and he didn't blame her one bit. This plan was about as solid as tissue paper in a rainstorm, but it was all they had. "Riley, I need you to trust me on this. I didn't survive 2 tours in Afghanistan just to get taken out by a bunch of walking corpses in my hometown." He gunned the engine and started doing slow circles in the parking lot, laying on the horn like he was trying to wake up the entire county. The effect was almost immediate. Zombie heads started turning his way, their dead eyes tracking his movement like radar dishes. Some of them actually started shuffling toward his truck, abandoning their posts at the store windows. Jake felt a surge of hope until he realized he was also attracting zombies from other parts of the street, drawing them in like metal filings to a magnet. "This is either gonna be brilliant or spectacularly stupid," he muttered to himself, watching his rearview mirror fill up with undead faces. He drove toward the far end of the parking lot, honking continuously, and watched with satisfaction as more zombies followed him like he was the Pied Piper of the apocalypse. When he figured he'd drawn off about half the crowd, he whipped the truck around in a tight circle and floored it back toward the alley, horn blaring 3 times. Through the chaos, he saw the side door of the Quickie Mart burst open, and Riley emerged with a kid who had to be Tommy clutched tight against her side. They were running like their lives depended on it, which they absolutely did, because the zombies who hadn't followed Jake's truck were already starting to notice the movement and turn their hungry attention toward fresh prey. Jake slammed on the brakes and threw his truck into park just as Riley and Tommy reached the alley, but the kid was moving slower than molasses on a cold day. Tommy looked like he was in complete shock, his little legs pumping as hard as they could while his sister practically dragged him along by his arm. Behind them, Jake could see at least a dozen zombies that had broken off from the main crowd, stumbling and lurching toward the side exit like they'd just caught the scent of a barbecue. The closest one was maybe 20 feet away, some guy in a torn business suit with his tie hanging by a thread and his briefcase still clutched in his death grip. "Move your asses!" Jake shouted through his open window, reaching across to throw open the passenger door. Riley practically threw Tommy into the cab and dove in after him, slamming the door just as the businessman zombie reached the truck and started pawing at the window with hands that looked like raw hamburger meat. Jake didn't wait for seatbelts or pleasantries. He punched the gas and sent gravel flying, clipping the zombie's legs and sending him spinning like a broken toy. Holy crap, holy crap, holy crap, Riley kept repeating, clutching Tommy so tight the kid could barely breathe. She was maybe 25, with short blonde hair that looked like she'd been running her hands through it all morning, and eyes that were trying real hard not to show how terrified she was. Tommy was a skinny little guy with freckles and a Pokemon t-shirt that was now torn and dirty from their escape. He hadn't said a word since getting in the truck, just stared out the windshield with eyes that had seen way too much for an 8-year-old. "You two okay?" Jake asked, weaving around an overturned minivan that was blocking half the street. "Nobody got bit or scratched." We're fine," Riley said, checking Tommy over for the 10th time since they'd gotten in the truck. "God, I can't believe that actually worked. I thought for sure we were zombie food when that back window gave out." Jake glanced in his rearview mirror and saw the parking lot of the Quickie Mart was still crawling with undead, but they were getting smaller in the distance. "Yeah, well, don't start celebrating just yet. We still gotta make it to the high school, and from what I'm seeing, this whole town's gone to hell faster than a greased pig at a county fair." As if to prove his point, they passed a house where someone had tried to barricade themselves inside using furniture piled against the front door. The barricade hadn't held, the door was hanging off its hinges, and Jake could see dark stains on the front porch that definitely weren't spilled coffee. "What's happening to people?" Tommy finally spoke up, his voice so quiet Jake had to strain to hear him over the engine noise. "Why are they trying to hurt everyone?" Riley shot Jake a look that clearly said, "Please help me explain this to an 8-year-old without completely traumatizing him," but Jake was coming up empty on kid-friendly explanations for the zombie apocalypse. "Something's making people real sick, buddy," he said finally. "But we're gonna get you somewhere safe, okay? There are good people at the high school who are gonna help us figure this whole mess out." They turned onto Industrial Boulevard, and Jake's heart sank like a stone in water. The road was completely blocked by a massive pileup involving at least 6 cars, a delivery truck, and what looked like a school bus that had jackknifed it across both lanes. Smoke was still rising from one of the cars, and Jake could see bodies scattered around the wreckage, some that weren't moving, and some that definitely should have stopped moving a long time ago. The zombies from the crash were wandering around the twisted metal like they were shopping for bargains at a junkyard. "Detour time," Jake muttered, throwing the truck into reverse. But as he started backing up, Riley grabbed his arm with a grip that could crack walnuts. "Jake, look." She was pointing toward the intersection behind them, where at least 30 zombies were pouring out of the residential area they'd just left, drawn by the sound of their engine like moths to a flame. They were trapped between the pileup ahead and a growing crowd of undead behind them, with nowhere to run and time running out faster than water through a broken dam. Jake's mind went into overdrive, scanning every inch of the blocked intersection like his life depended on it, which it absolutely did. The zombies behind them were getting closer by the second, their moaning getting louder and more urgent, like they knew dinner was about to get away. In front of them, the pileup looked like something out of a disaster movie, all twisted metal and broken glass, but Jake's trained eye caught something the others might have missed. There was a gap between the school bus and the delivery truck, maybe just wide enough for his Silverado if he was willing to scrape some paint and pray to whatever higher power was still listening. "Hold on tight and don't look," Jake told Tommy, who was pressed against Riley's side like he was trying to disappear completely. "This is gonna get bumpy real fast." He shifted into 4-wheel drive and floored the accelerator, aiming for that narrow gap like he was threading a needle in a hurricane. The truck lurched forward, engine roaring like an angry bear, and Jake could hear Riley muttering what sounded like a prayer under her breath. Smart girl, they were gonna need all the divine intervention they could get. The Silverado hit the gap at about 30 miles per hour, and immediately Jake knew they were in trouble. The passenger side mirror got ripped clean off by the school bus, sounding like a gunshot in the confined space, and the driver's side scraped against the delivery truck hard enough to send sparks flying. But they were moving forward, inch by painful inch, the truck's frame groaning under the pressure like it might split apart at any second. Through the windshield, Jake could see one of the zombies from the crash, a middle-aged woman in a nurse's uniform whose face was split open like a ripe melon, stumbling toward them with her arms outstretched. Come on," Jake muttered through gritted teeth, wrestling with the steering wheel as the truck fought against the tight confines of the wreckage. Behind them, the pursuing zombies had reached the back of the pile-up and were starting to climb over the twisted metal like some kind of undead obstacle course. One of them, a big guy in construction gear, was making better progress than the rest, using his bulk to push through gaps that would stop smaller zombies cold. Riley was keeping Tommy's face buried against her shoulder, but she was watching the mirrors with the intensity of a hawk tracking a mouse. "Jake, that big one's gaining on us. He's maybe 10 feet from the back bumper and closing fast. I see him." Jake gunned the engine one more time, and suddenly they popped through the gap like a cork from a bottle, tires hitting clear pavement with a screech that probably woke up every zombie in a 5-block radius. But they were through, and Jake didn't waste time celebrating. He took a hard right onto Riverside Drive, putting as much distance as possible between them and the nightmare they'd just escaped. The view from Riverside wasn't exactly encouraging. Jake could see the high school in the distance, sitting on top of Miller's Hill like some kind of fortress, but the road leading up to it was dotted with abandoned vehicles and small groups of zombies wandering around like they were lost tourists. Worse, there was a thin column of black smoke rising from the school's direction, not the heavy, choking smoke of a building fire, but the kind that came from burning vehicles or maybe a generator that had given up the ghost. "Is that where we're supposed to be going?" Riley asked, pointing toward the smoke. "Because that doesn't look particularly safe to me." Jake felt his jaw tighten as he studied the scene ahead. Marcus had said the military was setting up a safe zone at the high school, but that was over an hour ago in disaster time, which might as well have been a week. Things could change fast when the world was ending, and safe zones had a nasty habit of becoming death traps when too many people showed up at once. But they didn't have a lot of options. His truck was running low on gas, Tommy was starting to shake from exhaustion and shock, and pretty soon this whole area was gonna be crawling with every zombie in the county. "It's our best shot," Jake said finally, keeping his voice steady for Tommy's sake. "But we're gonna scout it out real careful before we commit to anything. Sometimes the devil you don't know is better than the one that's chasing your ass down the street." As they crested the hill leading toward Millfield High, Jake's worst fears started looking like prophecy coming true. The school parking lot was a complete disaster zone. Military vehicles were scattered around like toys thrown by an angry kid, some overturned, others burned out to nothing but black and metal skeletons. Bodies in camouflage uniforms were sprawled across the asphalt, and Jake couldn't tell from this distance whether they were dead or walking dead, but neither option filled him with confidence. The main building looked intact, but the windows on the first floor were either boarded up or completely shattered, and that thin column of smoke was rising from what used to be the gymnasium. "This doesn't look right," Riley whispered, like speaking too loud might draw attention from whatever had torn through the supposed safe zone. Tommy had gone completely silent again, just staring at the chaos below with those wide eyes that were seeing way too much reality for one day. Jake pulled the truck over behind a stand of pine trees about 200 yards from the school entrance, close enough to see what was happening but far enough away to make a quick escape if things went sideways. Jake grabbed his binoculars from the glove compartment and started scanning the area systematically, looking for any signs of life, the good kind, not the flesh-eating kind. "There," he said after a minute, pointing toward the school's main entrance. "Second floor, third window from the left. Someone just moved the curtain." He handed the binoculars to Riley, who adjusted them and focused on the spot he'd indicated. "I see it too. Looks like maybe 3 or 4 people up there, and they're definitely alive. One of them just waved at us." Riley lowered the binoculars and looked at Jake with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "But what happened to all those military guys? I count at least a dozen vehicles down there, and they're all either empty or worse." Before Jake could answer, his phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. The timestamp showed it was only 5 minutes old, which meant his buddy was still alive and kicking somewhere in this mess. The message was short and to the point: "School overrun at dawn. 30+ survivors in main building second floor. Zombies got in through gym. Military pulled out. We're holding but need help bad. Back in trance clear for now." "Well, that explains the smoke," Jake muttered, showing the message to Riley. "Looks like our safe zone turned into a last stand pretty quick. Question is, Do we try to get inside and help, or do we find somewhere else to hole up until this whole nightmare blows over? Riley was quiet for a long moment, watching Tommy fidget with his Pokemon cards like they were some kind of magical talisman that could make everything go back to normal. Those people up there, they're trapped, aren't they? Just like we were at the store, except worse because they can't run anywhere. Jake nodded grimly. Probably. And if Marcus is right about 30 survivors, that's a lot of people depending on whatever food and water they scrounged up before the zombies crashed the party. They might not last much longer without help. He studied the building through the binoculars again, noting the makeshift barricades visible through some of the windows and the desperate way whoever was up there had positioned themselves to watch all approaches. My dad always said you judge a person by what they do when nobody's watching and they don't have to help, Riley said quietly. Those people don't know us from Adam, but if we were trapped up there, we'd want someone to at least try to help, right? Jake felt a familiar weight settle on his shoulders, the same feeling he'd gotten every time his unit had to decide whether to help civilians caught in the crossfire overseas. Sometimes doing the right thing and doing the smart thing were two completely different animals, and sometimes you had to choose which one you could live with afterward. All right then, he said, starting the engine again. Let's go be heroes. But we do this smart and careful, because getting ourselves killed won't help anybody. Jake drove the Silverado down toward the school like he was approaching a combat zone, which pretty much described the situation perfectly. The back entrance Marcus had mentioned was hidden behind the maintenance building, away from the main carnage in the parking lot, but Jake could still see zombies wandering around the perimeter like security guards from hell. He parked the truck behind a dumpster that reeked of cafeteria food gone bad and turned to Riley and Tommy, his expression dead serious. Here's the deal, Riley, you stay with the truck and keep the engine running. If things go south, you drive straight out of here and don't look back. Tommy, you stay right next to your sister no matter what. Jake checked his rifle one more time and grabbed the emergency backpack he'd thrown together that morning, which felt like a lifetime ago. I'm gonna get inside, find Marcus and those survivors, and figure out an extraction plan. Give me exactly 20 minutes, then you leave whether I'm back or not. Like hell we're leaving you, Riley shot back, her jaw set in a way that reminded Jake of his drill sergeant back in basic training. We're a team now, whether you like it or not. Besides, those people up there might need more than one person to help them get out. Jake was about to argue when his phone buzzed with another message from Marcus, zombies breaching first floor. Running out of time fast. Whatever you're gonna do it now. The timestamp showed the message was sent 30 seconds ago, which meant the situation had gone from bad to catastrophic in the time it took to have this conversation. Change of plans, Jake said, making a command decision that felt both completely crazy and absolutely right. Riley, you can handle a rifle. When she nodded, he handed her his backup pistol instead. Easier to manage in tight spaces. Tommy, you stick between us at all times, no matter what happens. He looked at both of them seriously. We go in together, we come out together, and we bring as many of those people with us as we can carry. Sound like a plan? The maintenance entrance was unlocked, hanging open like someone had left in a real hurry. Inside, the hallways were dark except for emergency lighting that cast everything in an eerie red glow. Jake could hear the unmistakable sound of zombies moaning somewhere deeper in the building, mixed with what sounded like furniture being dragged across floors and people shouting instructions. They moved through the corridors like ghosts, Jake leading with his rifle ready, Riley covering their rear with Tommy sandwiched safely between them. They found the stairwell to the second floor, and Jake could hear Marcus's voice echoing down from above, directing people to reinforce a barricade. Marcus. Jake called up quietly, not wanting to alert every zombie in the building to their presence. It's Jake Matthews. I'm coming up with 2 civilians. The reunion was brief but heartfelt. Marcus looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past few hours, his uniform torn and dirty, but his eyes lit up when he saw Jake coming up those stairs. Behind him, Jake could see about 30 people crowded into what used to be the school library, ranging from elderly folks who'd probably been visiting the school for some community event to families with kids Tommy's age. They all had that shell-shocked look of people who'd seen their world turn upside down in a matter of hours. The gym's ceiling collapsed when the zombies overran it this morning, Marcus explained quickly while they helped move a heavy desk to reinforce the stairwell barricade. Military bug-out was so fast they left half their equipment behind, but they also left us sitting ducks when the real wave hit around noon. He pointed toward the windows, where Jake could see the parking lot was now crawling with easily 100 zombies, maybe more. They're attracted to sound and movement, but they can't climb worth a damn. Problem is, we're running out of food and water, and some of these folks got medical conditions. Jake studied the group of survivors, seeing determination mixed with exhaustion on every face. These weren't soldiers or survival experts, they were teachers, retirees, parents, kids, just regular people who'd found themselves in an impossible situation and refused to give up. How long can you hold this position? Maybe another day, 2 if we're lucky and quiet. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead, leaving a streak of dirt across his skin. But Jake, I got an idea that's either brilliant or completely insane. There's a convoy of school buses in the maintenance yard behind the building. Engines are good, fuel tanks are full, and if we can get everyone loaded up quiet-like, we might be able to punch through to the interstate before they know what hit them. Riley stepped forward, Tommy still clinging to her side but looking a little more hopeful than he had all day. Where would we go? I mean, if this is happening everywhere. My cousin runs a hunting lodge up in the mountains, about 60 miles north, Marcus said. Place is isolated, defensible, got its own well and generator. If anywhere's gonna be safe from this mess, it's there. He looked around at the group of survivors, ordinary people who'd become extraordinary through sheer necessity. But it's gonna take all of us working together. No heroes, no lone wolves, just folks looking out for each other like neighbors should. Jake felt something shift inside his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with adrenaline or fear. These people, Riley with her fierce protectiveness of Tommy, Marcus with his refusal to abandon civilians, even the elderly librarian who was organizing medical supplies with the efficiency of a field surgeon, they represented something the zombies could never touch or destroy. The strength of human spirit, the willingness to risk everything for strangers who'd become family in the span of a crisis. All right then, Jake said, feeling more sure of this plan than anything he'd done since the nightmare started. Let's get these buses running and show these walking corpses what happens when regular folks decide they're not going down without a fight. We got people counting on us, and I'll be damned if we let them down. As the sun began to set over the chaos of Millfield, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked like hope itself, Jake Matthews realized that sometimes the end of the world was just the beginning of discovering what humans were really made of. And what they were made of, it turned out, was pretty tough stuff. The end.